Thanks for joining me. In this video, we're going to skip ahead from the early and mid-90s to late 2001 and early 2002. I found myself without a place to stay when my then roommate moved to Japan, and I decided to return from Boston to my home state of Vermont. Shortly after 9/11, and living with my parents, I began exploring video game emulation to take my mind off things. Already a Japanese language learner, I had a handful of Japanese language games, but found them challenging to understand. Armed with emulators and ROM images, however, I felt empowered to translate video game text at my leisure, if only I could find some program to edit the game script. In that pursuit, I discovered Romhacking.org, then a repository of technical documents. I quickly realized this wasn't going to be so easy. However, I decided to take the Slayers game for the Super Famicom and try out what I had learned. Much to my delight, I managed to find and change the opening line of dialogue text, and a spark was kindled, however small. I'd like to take a moment here to discuss the how of this early work. As I mentioned in the previous video, all the game data exists as a blob of machine code. Computer processors are comprised of transistors, essentially switches, with only an on or off state. Because of this, calculations are all performed with the binary number system. My favorite explanation of binary involves dolphins. We have 10 fingers, and therefore base our counting on orders of 10. Dolphins, on the other hand, have 2 flippers, and therefore would count in orders of 2. The lowest binary digit, also known as a bit, in a binary number is the ones place, equivalent to decimal 0 or 1. However, the next place is the twos place, followed by the fours place, the eights place, the 16s place, and so on. A counting system that comes in handy when dealing with binary digits, aka bits, is hexadecimal. Hexadecimal, as you may suspect, is based on 6 hex and 10 decimal, or 16. It works the same as binary or decimal, but each place is a factor of 16. The digits that represent these 16 values are 0 through F. The reason this is useful is that you can express all 16 values of a 4-digit or 4-bit binary number using only a single hexadecimal digit. More conveniently, 2 hexadecimal digits together can express the full range of 8-bit values, and so on. Now back to 2002 and the Slayers game for Super Famicom. I soon came across Zophar's domain and the Whirlpool, where I likely discovered Robert Boyd's patch for the very same game. Robert continued on to found The Boyd Games, a successful indie game development company. Recently, Robert told me, yes, that was me with the Slayers patch, which was in turn based on somebody else's work. It was my only attempt at fan translating a game before I decided I'd rather just make them. Much like Robert, I wasn't convinced fan translation was for me either. I made a table file and added additional miscellaneous text and dialogue to Robert's patch manually via a hex editor. I realized it was not only tedious, but the resulting space limitations made the end product disappointing. To my credit, I made a derivative patch from the new work and shared it in what could have been my last and only contribution to the community. This humble beginning is likely familiar to many who first attempt hacking a ROM. King Mike of King Mike's Translations has this to say about his own beginnings. I worked on the French PAL version of ActRaiser. The largest difference from the NTSC versions is that the PAL versions have a difficulty select as well as an action-only mode. It differs from the Pro mode in the NTSC version in that it is available anytime and is affected by save data. It gives 5 lives, and it adds spell changing and max HP raising power-ups, as well as extra lives for score. I think I quit when realizing I wasn't doing much better than translating by dictionary, so even if I finished, it would have sucked. Also, not being familiar with the script extraction, I actually played through the game typed up everything in Notepad, then translated what I could and typed it back into the hex editor. Bongo, of Dynamic Designs, had never even programmed before, first trying his hand at hacking Zelda 2. I had no programming experience. In fact, it was Lord Tech who got me started. He was helping Prez, of ROM fame, and myself learn C and assembler. I remember Lord Tech telling me that I might not get it right away, but Prez surely did. So I was probably the newest you could be to coding. After Lord Tech tried helping me, I saw no better way than to learn how I know best, on my own, hands-on. So I learned QBasic after finding Necro's source for Thingy. Then I went on to learn 8386 assembler and loved it. That led the way to C, and then to 6502 and 65816 assembler, and it's all I've done since learning them. Now, somewhere around late 2002, I was contacted by Chris RPG of RPG1 Translations, who had been looking for a translator for Slayers. According to him, someone called SP Spiff had been going to work on it, but went suddenly MIA. When he noticed that I'd done some work on the game, he reached out and later sent me the script files, with the warning, "Now, you will have a heart attack when you first look in the file. There are something like 74 blocks." While I made it through intact, I did in fact become discouraged yet again. I'd never translated something this large, and honestly translated very little from Japanese to English, period. After messing with the script, I remember writing back to him and telling him it was just too much for me. This is where we come to an interesting crossroads. Again, I could have walked away from this hobby. I basically just had. However, I became struck by a feeling, some kind of stubborn determination to simply not give up. I emailed Chris a while later and asked if I could take another stab at translating those files. Thus began a year-long process of script translation, and an effort to get the Slayers project finished that will last for 8 years. I think we've reached another stopping point, but I hope this has helped you to start to get a glimpse of not only how obtuse, difficult, time-consuming, and chaotic this work can be, but also how ultimately rewarding. Some people keep going, others move on, but it's a challenge I find endlessly fascinating, and a passion I can never quite put to rest. Next time, I'd like to talk more about Slayers, and others I met and worked with on the way to releasing my first completed projects.